Goldie Roger, the king of the pirates. We know about his journey and the legacy he left behind. But what if his path had been different? What if, instead of becoming a pirate, Roger had sworn his allegiance to the Marines? The sun blazed above Marineford, and the courtyard was full of aspiring Marines training under their superiors. But two of the recruits stood out the most. Goldie Roger and Monkey D. Garp had joined the Marines around the same time. Garp was a rough fighter with fists as strong as cannonballs and a really buff physique, while Roger was a more slender man. Garp was a serious fellow, while Roger had a smile that could light up a dark cave. Despite their differences, both of them shared a common will that drew them together like magnets. Their first battle had been nothing more than a simple spar, a chance to test the waters. Garp's punches were heavy and full of raw strength, while Roger had a more chaotic fighting style that was elegant all the same. Their initial spar heated up before ending in a draw, with both men flat on their backs. Despite the busted lips and swollen knuckles, both of them were laughing loudly. From that day forward, they were rivals in everything. Who could do more push-ups, who could run faster, who could take down more pirates in battle. Years passed, and the two climbed through the Marine ranks together. In the Grand Line, they faced off against infamous pirates as they continued getting promoted due to their exploits. Garp, with his relentless pursuit of justice, and Roger, with his unshakable belief in freedom for everyone, were quickly recognized by the upper command of the organization. But the waters weren't easy to travel. The Marines had quite a large influence over the seas, but another force was growing at a really frightening pace. Rox, a name spoken in hushed whispers, had begun his conquest of the seas. He was the leader of the Rox Pirates, a crew made up of some exceptionally strong individuals. The young pirates were making quite the name for themselves, while Roger and Garp were trying to bring order to the sea. The world had yet to see his true terror, but his presence loomed like a storm on the horizon. Still, Roger and Garp remained locked in their never-ending competition, oblivious to the storm that would soon shake the very foundation of the world. The Grand Line had always been a pretty dangerous place, but Rox was taking it by storm. He destroyed ports and burned them to the ground overnight, destroyed and looted entire villages as he gathered up more forces, even going as far as attacking Marine bases and executing the people there. The Marines had long known of Rox, but it looked like his ambition had taken a new shape, growing beyond the simple conquest of territory. His sights were now set on something greater. Roger was sitting on the edge of a railing inside Marineford's Grand Hall, while around him, high-ranking officers pored over reports with anxious expressions. Garp stood beside Roger with his arms crossed. Garp had been thinking of going on a long vacation when Kong suddenly stormed in. Kong told Garp and Roger to head to God Valley to protect the Celestial Dragons. Garp didn't want to go save the people he hated, but Roger convinced him otherwise. Never in history had anyone dared to directly challenge the world nobles. They were the untouchables, protected by the full might of the Marines and the mysterious power of Emu and the Five Elders. Even the strongest pirates feared them because the consequences of defying them were absolute. Yet here was Rox, a maniac who saw the world itself as a battlefield, declaring that he would wipe them out entirely. Roger realized that if they didn't intervene, Rox would end up shattering the balance of the world. The tension in the room was suffocating, but Kong quickly gathered up the Marines and had them depart with Roger and Garp. Kong's orders were swift. A massive fleet was to be mobilized, the largest in Marine history at the time. Every available Vice Admiral and Rear Admiral was called upon. Even the legendary Admiral Zephyr was placed on standby. But the heart of the operation, the core of this desperate gamble, would rest on the shoulders of Garp and Roger, because their partnership had proved to be the Marines' strongest. The Marines departed and quickly made their way to God Valley, where the world nobles were taking part in the native hunting competition. The native population was rounded up and kept captive in cages before being released to be hunted down for sport. Problematic slaves and criminals were also being employed as additional game if necessary. It was a sickening sport that Garp had little patience for. As Roger and Garp reached God Valley, the island was eerily still. There weren't any signs of battle yet. The Celestial Dragons and their slaves had been gathered in a heavily fortified palace at the center of the island, surrounded by squads of CP-0. And then suddenly it happened. The sky split apart with a thunderous roar as a monstrous black ship emerged from the fog. It was followed by dozens of pirate ships, each manned by some of the strongest pirates the world had ever seen at the time. And right at the helm of the main ship stood Rox himself. He was a tall man with long, dark locks of hair. He had a tattered black coat, and his eyes burned with an unnatural glow, a hunger for destruction that sent a chill even through the hardened Marines. Behind him stood Edward Newgate, Charlotte Linlin, Shiki, Kaido, and countless others. Pirates known to be some of the most fearsome in the whole world. The Marines and God's Knights would have to face the full might of them. The first clash shattered the battlefield as pirates flooded the island. Garp led the charge against them. His fists crashed through enemy lines and sent entire squads of pirates flying. Roger was right behind him, followed by Sengoku and the rest of the Marines. Roger was a storm of chaos, his sword flashing like a golden bolt of lightning, cutting through any who dared stand before him. Roger was cutting down fodder when a massive Basento was swung at him. Roger blocked with his sword, and waves of Conqueror's Haki launched forward forward as he clashed with the massive Edward. Meanwhile, Kaido tore through Marine squads like a beast unleashed, with Charlotte right beside him as the two met with Garp on the battlefield. And then there was Rox. Rox loudly laughed as his conqueror's haki flooded the battlefield, causing numerous Marines and weak-willed pirates to black out. Then with Shiki, he went directly after the Celestial Dragons, avoiding the battlefield altogether. It was an absolute massacre that not even Sengoku, Kong, and the God's Knights were able to contain. Garp and Roger retreated from their fights to go after Rox, letting the other Marines deal with Edward, Linlin, and Kaido. Rox was quick to respond. Roger's instincts screamed at him before the attack even came. A force unlike anything he had ever felt before descended upon the battlefield. Rox moved like a phantom, his blackened fist crashing into Roger's blade, shattering the earth beneath him. Garp barely had time to react before another blow came his way. He blocked, but the force sent him hurtling through a mountain, the impact shaking the entire island. Rox was no mere pirate. His haki was monstrous, his aura like a void, devouring everything in its path. And he had a devil fruit with power like the void, the Yami Yami no Mi. Rox made short work of the God's Knights going after him, even injuring Figureland Garling, a notoriously strong member of the God's Knights. His strength defied logic. The battle raged on. Marines fell by the dozens. Admirals were wounded. Vice admirals slain. The God's Knights, despite their inhuman skill, found themselves overwhelmed. But the Rox pirates were suffering their own losses. Many of their lower divisions had been wiped out during the struggle. Garp and Roger fought harder than ever before, their rivalry cast aside in the face of true calamity. They fought as one, their attacks complementing each other. Their strikes relentless, but things were getting incredibly rough. A massive explosion soon engulfed the Celestial Dragon's palace. Screams filled the air as flames consumed the fortress. An abnormally large number of Celestial Dragons had been wiped out. And then, suddenly, dark circles began forming over the battlefield. Rox saw these and immediately sounded a retreat. As soon as he did so, the elders appeared. But Rox was quick with his retreat. A good number of his crew were left behind, but he made haste with the main members. His forces had suffered losses too. Edward, his Bacento now chipped, leaned against the wreckage of a warship, his breathing heavy. Shiki's golden mane was matted with blood, while Kaido, still in his youth, limped from a wound carved deep into his side. Charlotte was completely furious. She wanted to fight more and take over more souls, but all she had found was a devil fruit. But Rox routed them as the crew realized that they had done something that had never been done before. They had slaughtered Celestial Dragons. Their once arrogant presence had been reduced to smoldering ruins. Their gilded halls turned to ash beneath the weight of his wrath. The world had never seen such a direct challenge to its rulers. Rox had won. In the meantime, the remaining Marines were trying to get their bearings. God Valley had been reduced to rubble, and many of the slaves who were being hunted had escaped. God Valley had been turned into a graveyard for the Celestial Dragons that were present. The God Valley incident had become the Marines' greatest failure. As Garp and Roger stood amidst the wreckage, bruised and barely standing, they both realized that Rox had begun a new age. The world government tried to suppress the truth of what happened, but whispers of the disaster soon reached every corner of the seas. The biggest thing that came about from this was that many people who were oppressed by the Celestial Dragons found themselves believing that they could be overthrown. The Celestial Dragons were no longer untouchable. The name Rox became something more than just that of a pirate. But the battle was only the beginning of what he had in mind. His ambitions stretched further than any had dared before him. He had learned of the final island, Laugh-Tale, and he set course. With the world in turmoil and the Marines scrambling to recover, Rox took advantage of the chaos. His fleet moved swiftly, hunting down ancient secrets, seizing poneglyphs that others had failed to decipher. Unlike the future seekers of the One Piece, Rox did not see this as a journey of adventure. It was just a stepping stone for his greatest ambition, ruling the world. With each passing month, the Rox pirates moved closer to their destination, leaving destruction in their wake. They crushed rival pirate crews, snuffed out any Marine resistance, and obliterated Cypher Pole agents sent in desperation to stop them. Then, at last, they reached it. Rox and his remaining crew set foot on Laugh-Tale. What they found there was kept secret from all but themselves. And when Rox emerged from Laugh-Tale, he was no longer just a pirate. He had become a king. With the One Piece claimed, Rox did what no pirate before him had dared. He did not return to a life of mere conquest, nor did he retreat into legend. He declared war against the world government and told the world that he was going for their palace. Pirates and criminals rose at his command as the infamous Pirate King made his way to Mary Jawaz. Meanwhile, the Marines had been licking their wounds. Roger and Garp were training day and night to get stronger because they knew that this wouldn't be their final fight against Rox. When news reached the Marines, every single soldier remaining at their disposal was sent to Mary Jawaz. When they arrived, the remaining Holy Knights and the elders themselves took the reins of the Marine forces. Despite the losses they had suffered at God Valley, the elders were eerily calm. It looked like Rox had retreated for a reason before their arrival. The 5 elders, for the first time in history, abandoned their secrecy and moved to the front lines. And so began the greatest war in history, the battle between Rox and the entire world government. The war front was a hellscape of fire, steel, and blood. The world government's forces numbered in the thousands, but against them stood the Pirate King wielding the power of darkness. He stood at the front of his army like a god of war, his dark, unshackled haki suffocating the battlefield itself. With Garp and Roger at the helm, the Marines began their revenge battle against the Rox pirates. It was unlike anything the world had seen. scene, with everything shattering as these two forces clashed. And then the true demons arrived for the party. The 5 elders revealed their monstrous forms. St. Marcus Mars, the warrior god of environment, morphed into a colossal, fire-breathing demon bird whose very presence scorched the battlefield. St. Hopman Warkari, the warrior god of justice, became a boar-like titan, his hardened body impervious to any attack. St. Ethan Braun Nusjuro, the warrior god of finance, unsheathed the legendary Shodai Kitetsu, his skeletal centaur-like form moving with impossible speed. St. Shepherd Jupiter, the warrior god of agriculture, burrowed through the battlefield as a monstrous sandworm. St. J. Garcia Saturn, the warrior god of science and defense, twisted into a grotesque Ushi Oni, his venomous limbs spreading death wherever they struck. The battle took a terrifying turn. For the first time, the Rox pirates faced foes who could match their monstrous might. Rox was quick to go headfirst against the elders, but they had unnatural regenerative abilities. Even tearing off their limbs did nothing to cease their assault. His fists, once able to crush even the strongest of men, now met unyielding flesh and supernatural abilities. The elders moved like calamities, their powers reshaping the battlefield itself. But Rox was not a man to falter. He laughed in the face of the divine as he released the power of his devil fruit. The darkness began surrounding the elders and the marines. Its weight was absolutely suffocating. The battlefield was drowning in chaos. Rox nullified the powers of Saint Saturn and ripped his limbs from his body, and suddenly the man could no longer regenerate. Rox's devil fruit seemed strong enough to even suppress the power of an elder. The rest took a step back in shock. An elder hadn't died in centuries. Just as it seemed Rox might still overpower the elders, the world itself grew silent. A presence unlike any other descended upon the battlefield. It was not a man, not a monster, not a god. It was something beyond all of them. From the skies, the figure emerged, draped in shadows, their forms shifting and formless. Their eyes, cold and inhuman, gazed down upon the war with neither anger nor malice, only absolute, undeniable authority. Imu's power seemed to drown out even the darkness of the Yami Yami no Mi. The entire battlefield froze. Even Rox felt it. The presence of something older, something beyond human understanding. And then Imu began breaking reality apart. They twisted the darkness emanating from Rox, and the air seemed to crumble in front of it. Rox refused to kneel. He lunged forward with an earth-shattering blow aimed at the throne of the world. But before he could land his strike, his body simply ceased to exist as the darkness enveloped him. Everyone was stunned when they realized what had happened. There wasn't any resistance when Imu covered Rox. It just looked like his own devil fruit was swallowed, and then there was simply nothing left behind. In an instant, the strongest man in the world was gone. The Rox pirates were wide-eyed, and their forces scattered in an instant. Their captain was no longer alive, and they could think of nothing other than to run when faced with such a monster. Edward quickly ordered a retreat. Charlotte, refusing to abandon Kaido, stood her ground against the elders. Her massive frame took blow after blow, her soul energy burning bright. But despite the power she had, it was all over once Imu stepped in themselves. With a final defiant scream, she fell. Kaido, bloodied and enraged, tried to save her, but before he could act, Edward grabbed him and forced him to retreat. Shiki stayed behind to face Imu, but even he was no longer in their league. There was no winning this war. And from the shadows, Roger and Garp watched in horror. They had fought and bled and given their all to fight against the Rox pirates. To protect this thing, they couldn't understand what they had just witnessed. This was not justice or balance. This was absolute control. For the first time in their lives, Roger and Garp felt a dread that seemed primordial. Without a word, they turned their backs on the war. They abandoned the Marines, the government, the cause they had fought for their entire lives. They fled from Mary Jawaz. With Rox destroyed, the war was over, and the world government rewrote history. The God Valley incident was buried. The war itself was never spoken of again. The name Rox was erased. His crew scattered, his legacy hidden. Only a few men remained who truly understood the truth. Roger and Garp had seen something that shattered their understanding of the world. The world government was not just an institution. It was a force of absolute control, willing to erase anyone who stood in its way. The 5 elders, the hidden powers of the world, and above all, Imu had shown that no rebellion, no uprising, no pirate crew could ever hope to truly challenge their dominion. But Roger and Garp also realized that the world couldn't be handed over to a demon. They had to find a way to take back the throne and give it to the people. The Marines were all but obliterated, and so were the pirates who stood against the world government. In the end, it looked like only the demonic elders and Imu were left alive. They realized that if the system could not be fought with the might of the Marines, then it would have to be destroyed by a revolution. The journey led them to far-off islands where the world government had a weak hold. They followed rumors of rebels, as Garp knew who he had to find. Garp had never been one for sentimentality. He was a warrior and a Marine through and through. But as he soon journeyed to and stood before the entrance of a remote revolutionary stronghold for the first time in his life, he felt a bit hesitant. The reason he felt this way was because he knew the man leading this movement. It was his own son, Monkey D. Dragon. The years had turned him into something else entirely. Dragon had the piercing gaze of someone who had seen too much, who carried the weight of a war that had yet to begin. His presence was like a storm on the horizon, quiet but impossibly heavy. Garp had spent his life fighting for justice. But now, he stood before his son, a man branded a criminal, a traitor, a terrorist. Yet for the first time, he felt that maybe his son had been right all along. The meeting was silent at first, but then Roger gave Garp a nudge. Dragon studied his father, searching for for the man who had once worn the colors of the enemy. But Garp no longer stood as a Marine. He stood as a man seeking change. And for the first time in their lives, father and son stood on the same side. The revolution would begin. Roger realized that they would need to bolster their forces and find a way to defeat Imu. He knew that the power of the Yami Yami no Mi could take care of the elders, but there was something missing, a power that could destroy Imu, and he sought to find it along with more allies. Roger knew that if they were going to challenge the world government, they needed warriors who could match the forces that had once crushed rocks. They needed monsters, and there were two men who fit that description perfectly, Whitebeard and Kaido. Over the years, the world had changed, but the remnants of the Rocks pirates were still legends in their own right. Whitebeard had retreated from the world, choosing to create a family rather than seek conquest. Kaido, on the other hand, had become a force of pure destruction. His hatred for the world government had only grown, fueled by the knowledge that even rocks had not been enough to challenge the throne. He sought strength above all else, believing that only true power could change the world. Roger found them both. Whitebeard was the first. Whitebeard saw Roger in a different light, realizing that he was no longer a dog of the government. They had both seen evil on Mary Jawaz, and they both understood what it meant. Whitebeard realized that Roger was now fighting for freedom. Roger did not need to convince him. Whitebeard already knew what needed to be done. As Whitebeard joined the revolution, he gave Roger and Garp a devil fruit. Whitebeard had found this with rocks on Laughtail, and he knew that the fruit held within it a prophecy unlike any other, a prophecy toward freedom. Realizing that they needed more power, Roger decided that Garp would be the one to eat the fruit. Garp hesitated. He had spent his entire life relying on nothing but his own fists, but the world had changed. The enemies they faced were not men, but demons in human skin, and so he made his choice. With one bite, Monkey D. Garp consumed the Gomu Gomu no Mi, and the world would never be the same again. While Garp began training, Roger continued his journey with Whitebeard. He soon found Kaido. War had shaped him, and loss had hardened him. Now, he sought only chaos. Roger stood before Kaido with a grin, unfazed by the dragon's towering presence, and the battle began. The massive fight lasted 3 whole days. 3 days of the sky splitting apart, 3 days of the ground shaking beneath their feet, 3 days of Kaido's fire against Roger's will. And when it ended, Kaido did something no one expected. For the first time in years, he laughed. And for the first time since Rocks, Kaido found something worth following. The revolution gained its warlord. Roger continued to bolster the revolution while roaming through the seas, searching for that final piece of the puzzle. On his journey, as the revolution began to take shape, fate led Roger to a wandering swordsman, Silver's Rayleigh. Once they might have been rivals. In another life, Rayleigh might have been the right-hand man of Pirate King Roger. But in this life, Roger was not a pirate, and Rayleigh was a man without a purpose. The world had changed. The seas were filled with chaos, and the swordsman had seen too many wars to believe in causes. But when Roger approached him, speaking of an uprising against the very gods themselves, something in Rayleigh stirred. Roger fought against Rayleigh as a warrior testing another, and in the end, Rayleigh sheathed his sword and joined Roger's side. The revolution gained its strongest blade. Soon, Roger would follow rumors of a devil fruit to a man who seemed to have acquired it. Roger had finally found it, the Yami Yami no Mi that Rocks once wielded. The revolution was no longer a whisper in the dark. It was a storm on the horizon. Roger, Garp, Dragon, Whitebeard, Kaido, Rayleigh, and a growing army of warriors stood together, ready to challenge the very foundations of the world. Roger was equipped with the Yami Yami no Mi, while Garp had the Gomu Gomu no Mi. These two rivals stood side by side to finally revolt against the world government and free the world from Imu's hold. Over the time that Roger and Garp were building the revolution, the world government had replenished a good number of its forces. Despite that, there weren't too many strong opponents left for the revolutionaries. The gods' knights had been wiped out, their final remnants crumbling under the weight of the revolution. The world government, once the unshakable authority of the seas, now had only one last line of defense. The 5 elders, and above them all, Imu, the true ruler of the world. The revolution had gathered the strongest warriors the world had ever seen, and right at the center stood Garp and Roger. The final battle had begun. The elders descended, monstrous and unrelenting, their devilish forms twisting and shifting with unfathomable power. They moved like nightmares given form, their strength tearing through the revolutionaries with inhuman ferocity. Rayleigh's blade clashed against Saint Nishiro's cursed sword, each strike sending shockwaves across the battlefield. Kaido, in his full dragon form, wrestled against the monstrous Saint Marcus Mars, their roars shaking the heavens. Whitebeard shattered the land beneath Saint Topman Warkery with the might of his Gura Gura no Mi. But the true battle was at the heart of Pangaea Castle, in the ruined remains of Mary Jawaz. Roger and Garp faced Imu. As Imu stood in front of them, Roger unleashed the darkness of the Yami Yami no Mi, while Garp transformed into the god of liberation. Facing them was a figure shrouded in shadow, a presence so vast, so unnatural, that even the air around them felt heavy with its will. Faster than thought, dark tendrils lashed out, consuming everything in their path. The ground melted away, and the very air hummed with an otherworldly force. Roger met the attack head-on, his sword gleaming with advanced conqueror's haki while surrounded by darkness. The impact seemed to shatter reality itself, but Imu did not falter. With a wave of their hand, the world warped, and the castle became a void. But Garp reached in and grabbed that void before throwing it away. It was a surreal moment as Imu realized that Nika had reincarnated in the form of this man. Garp had always relied on his fists. He had never needed tricks, never needed a devil fruit, but now he was more than just a warrior. He was a force of nature, his body stretched beyond imagination. imagination, his fists ignited with a light that rivaled the sun itself. The ground beneath him bent like rubber, and the sky itself danced to his rhythm. This was the power of freedom. This was the power of Nika. 1,000 tendrils pierced through the air, aiming to erase Roger and Garp from existence, but the two moved. Faster than light, Garp's fists struck like falling stars, smashing through Emu's attacks like paper. His body twisted and turned, dodging strikes with impossible fluidity. The very air sang with his laughter, a sound that filled the battlefield with hope. Roger joined the fray, his blade cutting through the very fabric of Emu's being as his darkness pulled at Emu's form. His conqueror's hockey clashed against the ancient entity's will, shaking the heavens, but Emu refused to fall. With an unearthly roar, the shadows converged, forming a monstrous celestial titan. Emu's body stretched into the sky, their form an amalgamation of darkness and divine fury. It seemed like an old god had come onto the earth, but this wouldn't be enough. Roger and Garp, light and darkness, stood together to face this demon. Roger blackened all of Emu's titanic body, surrounding it in darkness, right as Garp increased the size of his fist to massive proportions. Within the darkness, Garp's fist of light crashed into Emu like a meteor, sending him crashing into the ground. As Emu's form cracked and began to break into fragments, Roger absorbed them. The two rivals turned heroes used every last bit of their power. And then, the god who had ruled the world for centuries was no more. With their leader gone, the elders faded into nothingness, their centuries-long grip on the world vanishing in an instant. The battlefield grew silent. The revolutionaries stood victorious. And as the first light of the new era rose over Marineford, the world was finally free. Roger and Garp stood together, looking out over the dawn of a new age. The era of the world government was over, and the world at last belonged to the people. Make sure to subscribe for more One Piece videos.